Hello, it's Lynn Watts here with Wyatt the Wonder Dog Books. And today I'm going to continue talking about counselor burnout. And in particular, in this video, I'm going to talk about boundaries. So before I get started and talking about some of the concepts important in boundaries, I want to share a couple of resources for you. And one of them is this book, The Gifts of Imperfection. This is obviously a book for you as the counselor, not one to share with children, although you may learn some things in here that you want to include in some lessons. This is by Brene Brown. And if you haven't read any Brene Brown, why not? She's kind of a classic traditional part of counseling, I think, and she's got a lot of good information out there. She's written numerous books. This one was probably, I think it's one of the first books of hers that I ever read, and I go back to it over and over again. And let me just tell you a couple of the chapters that I think are pertinent to talking about burnout, and in particular, setting boundaries. One is on cultivating authenticity, letting go of what people think, often an issue in terms of setting boundaries. One of them is called cultivating self-compassion, letting go of perfectionism. Again, often an issue in terms of setting boundaries. So I'd recommend that book just for you to read for your own information. But I might mention that my school counselor small group guide, many of the lessons for students are based on what I just talked about. They're based on that book. For instance, there's one on authenticity. There's one on real feelings. There's one on self-compassion. All right. So I really did use that book, the information in that book as somewhat of a model for the small group guide. So I would recommend that as a, extension of what you might learn in that book. So that's a good resource for you. And I'll link to that in the show notes. So let's talk about, of course, why school counselors struggle to set boundaries. I've already identified burnout as feeling overwhelmed, overcommitted in previous videos. So if you haven't read about the definition of burnout, then you might want to go back to one of my other videos. But this one, I just want to talk about boundaries, which is one of the key things that we need to do as school counselors to make sure that we prevent burnout and also to make sure we're effective. I think that's a key part of it. So let me just talk about, 5 reasons why we might struggle to set boundaries. Why is this hard for us? The first one is the helper mindset. I think I've mentioned this before, but simply that need to be helpful, which is not a bad thing in and of itself, but sometimes we feel like we need to be all things to all people in all situations. And that's simply not realistic. And so it can be difficult to set boundaries if that's our mindset, that we need to always be available, always helpful, so on. So the helper mindset can get in the way. Number 2 is guilt and fear of letting other people down. So again, if we're afraid that we're going to disappoint people, that we're not going to be there for them, not going to be supportive of people, and that we're letting them down, that can create tension, and that can, of course, cause us not to set boundaries, which can be a problem. The third one is role ambiguity. Sometimes we really don't know what our role is, and that can be partially our fault for not defining it. It can also be partially the fault of the overall system that we're a part of. Maybe it hasn't defined our role, and we've just kind of given us a sort of loose definition. And so a lot of times we have a hard time saying no because we don't know exactly what our role is, and it kind of extends to everything. A fourth one is lack of administrative support. So if we have an administration that feels like we need to be doing everything, even things that aren't clearly defined as our role, that can be a problem. And then the fifth one is our own perfectionism, our desire to do everything perfectly and never make mistakes and make sure that we just cover all our bases. So all of those 5 things can get in the way of setting boundaries. The problem is, what is the consequences of not setting boundaries? It is burnout, but it's also burnout from excessive stress, from emotional exhaustion, trying to be all things to everybody. It also means that we have reduced effectiveness. So many times we don't set boundaries because we want to be effective. We want to do everything we can. But when we have said yes to so many things, then we are less effective. So we're actually defeating ourselves. It can cause compassion fatigue, so that we just don't care that much. So we're not as compassionate. We don't have the kind of empathy because we're just kind of worn out with it. It definitely means decreased job satisfaction. I post all the time on social media from counselors who are just absolutely worn out and looking for a different career, all because of burnout, not because they don't like the kids. It's not because they don't like the work. It's because it's overwhelming. And so consequently, there is also a higher likelihood of leaving the profession. So what are the benefits of setting boundaries? I think it's just the opposite of what we talked about. It's improved mental health. You feel better emotionally. You feel better. You're not overwhelmed, and you can stay emotionally present. You get better student outcomes because what you're working on, you're actually able to put in the time that's necessary, and the concentration, the emotion, all the things that need to go into doing a good job, which obviously means more job satisfaction instead of burnout. You get more respect actually from people. If people feel like you're just, a jack of all trades, you do everything and anything, they don't have the same respect for you as they do when they know that what you do, you hone in on what you do well, and you do it with excellence. And then finally, it helps you stay in your career longer. You don't burn out and start looking for everything else that you can do to get out from it. So you cannot pour from an empty cup. This is a common analogy, but it's very true. And boundaries help you keep your cup full. So I would encourage you to make sure that you have strong boundaries, that you're clear on what your job definition is, where your boundaries are, and knowing that that is going to sharpen the impact that you have. So as always, thanks so much for listening, and thanks so much for all you do to benefit children.